Bang ding ding, trademark. He come out 6'7" tall. Bang ding ding, one is star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. This is a perfect day.
Woke up to the sound of the garbage truck again. Upstairs neighbor's toilet's leaking on my head. Cars broke down, I missed the bus, there runs a 10. I had a feeling this was a day to stay in bed. I finally left my pad right on the jumbo's cloud roof. A police officer pulled out his gun and said, I said, sir, you got the wrong guy. I guess it's just a perfect day. It's just a perfect day. Na, 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 na,
Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of Eggs. This week, our guest is Steve Gordon. Steve is a two-time entrepreneur and best-selling author of Unstoppable Referrals, 10X Referrals, Half the Effort, and The Exponential Network Strategy. He's the host of the Unstoppable CEO podcast and has published more than 400 articles on marketing and sales for professional service firms. His firm, The Unstoppable Agency, helps consultants and digital agencies land great clients by hosting their own podcast and using his proprietary podcast prospecting method. So here to talk about all that and more is our special guest, Steve Gordon.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate the introduction. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, pleased to have you. Thanks so much for making time. So, I feel like that's a, pretty good introduction, really. It sort of covers all the bases, but why don't you give us a little bit of background, how you got into this space, how you got started down this or in this career?
Well, I didn't start out in marketing. I actually started out in a little tiny discipline of engineering called geomatics, which probably nobody listening to this has ever heard of, but I got a degree in that and went to work for a consulting firm in that discipline. Out of college, I was a 10th employee, and it was a really great opportunity. I came in and kind of got mentored by the founder, and 4 years later, he asked me to take over and run the company. So I was 28 years old, and here I was the CEO of this professional services firm, and now I'm in charge of marketing and sales and running the company and all that. And it was really kind of baptism by fire, and so it was a great opportunity. You had a great mentor in the founder. We were able to grow that business. And then I just realized that I enjoyed the act of attracting the client a lot more than I did the act of delivering the service that we were delivering in that business. And so I decided in 2010 to kind of change directions and start working with other professionals, other service businesses, and helping them get clients. And I've been doing that now for the last decade. It's an absolute blast.
Well, that's awesome. I think it's funny that you bring up, sort of baptism by fire. I feel like that's the way that most people get into the thing they find out that they like later. So that's an interesting insight. So I guess let's talk a little bit about that. Like, how do you help somebody, if you've got a small business and you're looking to improve, because I think for a lot of people, I guess what's interesting is that your interest seems to be in the chase, right? In this tracking down the person and bringing them on board. And I think for most small businesses, that's the hardest part, is finding new business and bringing people in, and they would much rather perform their service than they would go out and chase people down. So, I guess, what is it about your personality that draws you to that? And then how do you do that on behalf of your clients?
Well, so it's interesting. You use the word chase. I'm not sure I would use that word. I don't like chasing clients down. I like attracting clients. And maybe that's the technical background. Is I like to create systems that will attract the clients to me or to our clients. And you're right. Most business owners don't want to have to go and do that. They got into whatever business they're in because they love what they do. And then they got that wake up call of, oh yeah, I got to go sell it now if I'm going to pay the bills. So, but I think that's an important distinction. You see a lot of people out there that are trying to chase business. And I've always found that that's very difficult to do. And it's very difficult for most business owners to sustain because they don't like doing it. But if you can build a system that will attract the right people, normally you get better clients because they're not people that you've chased down, that you've cajoled, that you've, tackled in the parking lot to try and get them to come and work with you. They're coming to you because they, I tell our clients all the time that before anybody ever does business with you, there's really 3 purchases that they're going to make. And the only one we ever count is the one where they give us money. But the 2 before that are really, really important. And the first one is that they've got to buy into the idea that they've got a problem and that problem is important enough to them to spend money to solve. And a lot of times when we're chasing people, we're trying to convince them that they have a problem that they don't care about. And so it's much more difficult. And then the second purchase they have to make, the second thing they got to buy is they've got to buy you and your solution. They've got to wake up in the morning and go, Ryan's my guy, Mike's my guy, and have that kind of decision made before they're really ready to come and work with you. And so I like to go and build systems that accomplish those 2 kind of mental purchases that potential clients make. And to me, that's fascinating. It's so much fun.
So you've referenced systems a few times now. I'm just kind of curious, what are the main parts of the systems that you build? Are there like specifics that you stick to and then you kind of adapt them per industry? If you're going into, a design firm, you'd obviously have different things that you would focus on versus like a landscaping business. Are there, when you develop a system for a business, are there key elements that you focus on more than others?
Well, yeah, we really break it down into 3 parts of the system, and then we can get into sort of the specific tactics that we tend to use right now. But I think for anybody that's running a business and listening to this and trying to think about it, you really want to look at, do I have a system that generates new and interested leads? And what does that system look like? And is it generating those leads in the proper context? And I'll come back and we can talk about what that is. And then the second piece is, do I have some system in place that's capturing them and playing the long game? So I'm staying in front of them for the long haul, not just the next 30 days. And then if they don't close, they're in the bottom of the desk drawer. Do you guys ever have one of those desk drawers where you were networking and you put the business cards and they went to the back of the desk drawer and they started, collecting dust and getting dirty back there, and you forgot about them for a year?
Oh, yeah.
I've got a stack of business cards that's probably 4 inches tall and the rubber band's starting to break. It's just a lot of business cards.
Yeah. So we want a system that'll not allow that to happen. And it'll take all of those people, those really good relationships that you've started, and will help you nurture them over time, because a lot of those people are going to make a decision to buy what you do, but they just might not do it right now. And so we got to stay in touch with them. So that's the second piece of this. And then the third piece is we got to have a way to convert them, into our sales process, to have a conversation with them and then, have them become a client. So I like to think of it in those 3 parts. And depending on the business and where they are, most businesses have pieces of all of that in place. And so we'll look at an individual business and try and identify, well, okay, where's the biggest gap right now? And let's plug that first, and then we'll build out from there. For the vast majority of businesses, it's in that middle piece. They've got some amount of lead flow, but they're wasting most of it. They've probably got unconverted leads that over the years, they were in that stack with the rubber band that, that's about to pop. And if we could just begin communicating with the people that they've already begun a relationship with and do that in a way that adds value, then we can probably jumpstart things pretty quickly. And so we'll look at it and kind of decide where to begin first. And then the other big gap is usually on the lead generation side. Most of the time on the sales side of it, the conversion side of it, most of the business owners that I've ever met, they're pretty good when they get in front of a prospect, particularly if they get in a prospect that's well educated. And so that's kind of how we look at it. And I'm happy to get into tactics in each of those areas, but I think it's important to break it out.
Yeah, no, I think that's really useful information. Thank you. And I do want to go back. I mean, just a few minutes ago, I just didn't have the opportunity to pat you on the back for this stuff. So for the little catch, about chasing versus attracting, I think that is, it's nuanced, but I think it's so important, right? It's maybe the most important distinction that you could make in that sort of, system that you're building to try and draw, or generate new clients or new leads. And I think it's really important that we just maybe pay a little extra attention or a little extra thought to that, because this idea of, especially in a service industry specifically, like I run a marketing advertising agency on the, as my day job. We experience this all the time, especially with junior creative and junior account and people like that. They go looking for business, right? They go looking after people, and they start chasing them down. And it's this idea that you just can't convince somebody they have a problem. They have to know that they've got a problem. They have to come to it sort of on their own, because you're not going to be able to just nudge them through the door and make them do the work. And even if you do manage to nudge them through the door and make them do the work, they generally won't be a great client. It will be a bad experience for you and them. And it usually crashes and burns. It doesn't end very well. And so I think it is really important that, that distinction of attract versus chase.
Well, I want to kind of lean on what you just said, because the idea that they're not going to be a great client, I think people overlook the method that you use to win that client and the influence it has over how they're going to behave when they are a client.
I think that's true.
Yeah. I mean, early in my career, I didn't get it. I thought it was all about, I was going to go out and I was going to network and I was going to, meet people, and I was going to tell them what we did in such a compelling way, because I'd have the perfect elevator speech or, 30-second pitch at the networking group or whatever. And people were immediately going to go, I've got to hire Steve. I need that firm. It wasn't anything further from the truth. And, it took me a little while to figure out, well, wait a second. I've got to do a couple of different things. I got to open relationships with the right people, and I got to kind of be strategic about who that is. But I've also got to really be playing the long game here, because if I'm opening relationships with the right people, then sooner or later they're going to have a problem that I can solve, but I don't know when. And I think that's where a lot of, particularly people, you mentioned people who are kind of younger in the business, they get impatient. Mm-hmm. They don't have the, kind of that horizon where, I've been doing this for 25 years now, 2 different businesses that I've built. And I know that sometimes it just takes time for a client to mature. They're not ready yet. They're not going to be ready yet.
Well, and I think there's also this component that it's sort of like, I don't know, if you stopped and asked yourself, like, how could you possibly know what their problem is? Right. And I think with a lot of junior people, and even myself, maybe until the last 5 or 6 years, as I've sort of matured in business and everything else, this idea that I know your problem better than you know your problem, or that I'm going to have some solution that we're just going to squeeze your problem into, is, I think, I don't know, it's kind of offensive, actually, this idea that no, I know what's best for you, and I think a lot of young people and salespeople tend to get a little tactical first. Like, I have a service or a product or something to sell, rather than developing that relationship up front and figuring out where they fit into the equation.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, for sure. And it's been interesting to kind of watch my own and reflect on my own evolution in all of this. So I'd love to say that 25 years ago I was smart enough to kind of understand it all. But I mentioned I had a great mentor. Part of what I learned in that process was that one of the best ways to create that attraction is to go out and be a leader in your market. And so early on, I was maybe 3 months out of college, gave the worst speech of my life, just standing in front of this darkened room in a breakout session at a conference. But the room was filled with all the right people. And he and I were giving a presentation, and I, of course, I was responsible for, certain parts of the presentation, and I was up there shaking. I was sweating profusely. Had a guy in the audience who I'd gone to college with and was good friends with, and he came up afterwards, and I asked him, "So what'd you think?" And he said, "Well, the good news is nobody left." And he said, "You looked pretty rough up there." I said, "Yeah, okay, I get it. Probably the worst presentation I've ever given." But when I think back to who was in the room and who in that room ultimately became a client of ours over the next 4 or 5 years, we probably did $6 million worth of business out of the people in that room. Now, it wasn't because I gave that speech. It was because that was the beginning of a relationship. But, that was one of the things I learned early on, was that by going out and in that presentation and ones we gave subsequent to that, we were talking on a topic that was really changing in the industry. And there was a lot of controversy around which direction you should go. And we kind of took a stand, and we were a little bit controversial, but we took a stand and we led. And that really attracted a group of people to us. It didn't attract everybody to us. It really aggravated some people, and it repelled some people, but it attracted all the people we really wanted to attract. And that was a lesson that I'll never forget.
So on your LinkedIn profile, you have this quote that's all caps and bold, and it says, "Obscurity is the enemy." And I think that's kind of where you're going with this. Can you kind of break that down for us and just tell us why it's there and why it's in bold?
Yeah. So I was watching a YouTube video with Seth Godin, and Seth was talking to some group of entrepreneurs, and he made that statement. He may have phrased it slightly differently, but the thing that I took from that, because it immediately resonated with me, because I hear it all the time from businesses that are interested in working with us. They describe themselves as being really great at what they do, but they get frustrated because not that many people know about it. And I think Seth's point in that was, look, we're all running around trying to kind of protect our little ideas, or this is the way we do it over here. But the problem isn't that somebody's going to rip off your ideas. It's the fact that nobody knows your ideas. Nobody knows the great work that you do. And I think that's the biggest threat to any small business, is that people just don't know about you. They don't know about all the great work you do. They don't know about the value that you bring. And I think that's the fundamental problem to focus on.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, I think so many small businesses get caught up in their own little echo chamber, where they see their own marketing materials all the time, or, they're always talking about their business, and it feels like your whole world is surrounded with this. Everywhere you go, you notice people doing the kind of work you're doing, and, oh, I had that idea first, and these kinds of things. But it's sort of self-selecting, right? I mean, we're drawn to this or sort of create these biases because we're surrounded by them. And so I think it is, it's a great observation, but also maybe one of the harder things to implement for people, this understanding that, no, keep beating that drum because nobody knows who you are.
I think it is the hardest thing to do. I mean, the old joke in marketing is we all get tired of our marketing before the market does. Most of the time the market doesn't even know we've been marketing and we're tired of it. And you've got to just be willing to continue to, as you say, beat the drum and keep putting that message out there. And what I like about that quote is, to me, it really frames, as a business owner, it really frames the thing that you've got to show up and do. Every day you're fighting against obscurity. You're fighting to break out of being the best kept secret in your industry or in your market.
Well, I wonder if you have any thoughts, to that end, on the subject of niching and sort of choosing a niche, because, one of the ways that you can stand out basically is figure out your niche, right? I mean, it's the more you can sort of narrow in, and I see you doing it even in your own business, using podcasts as a way to draw new clients or as a marketing strategy. I mean, for people like you, I'm sure, and for Mike and I who've been doing this for some time now, it feels like podcasts are ubiquitous and they're everywhere. But the reality is that we're still sort of at the tip of the iceberg. And so in your situation, by niching down into an agency that guides people into podcasts, you're somewhat on the edge of this, new medium, which doesn't feel that new to us, but still for many is. And so I wonder if you wouldn't talk, if you have any experience in sort of, the power or the value in niching, and sort of maybe how you would identify a niche to move into.
Yeah, so I look at this a little bit differently than I think a lot of people do, and the reason that we've kind of settled on podcasts isn't because of a conscious decision to kind of niche down to that. It's more of a practical kind of medium. It allows us to do some things with a business owner to give them really great marketing without them having to do very much work at all. So, and we can talk about why we've focused on podcasting. But I like to think about kind of this narrowing your focus from the standpoint of how you're going to apply that to your marketing. When you start talking about narrowing your focus, what we would call ideal client, most business owners get really scared. They freak out. They're like, oh my gosh, if I narrow it down and say I'm only going to do business with these people, that means the next guy that walks up with money in his hand and that doesn't fit that description, I'm going to send them away. And I think that's the wrong way to look at it. Now, it could mean that. And if it does for you, that's a business decision and that's okay. But I like to look at it from the perspective of a marketing. So if I'm working on attracting clients, is it more effective for me to go out with a message that speaks to everybody, which is what virtually every business does? Or is it more effective for me to look at the groups that I do business with and kind of break them into these smaller categories so I can speak to them individually? And I'm happy to share an example of that, but that's the way I look at it. It's more from a marketing perspective.
Well, and I think that makes perfect sense, right? I think this is one of those, I don't know, sort of secrets of business that for whatever reason doesn't trickle down. I mean, you made the observation that most businesses don't do this, right? They don't niche down. But I think it's kind of related to what we were talking about before, that you think you're speaking to everyone or that everyone knows your brand. Like there's it must be an element of our human psychology or physiology that we don't understand scale very well. And so this idea that, of course, everybody's seen my logo. I'm exhausted of it. Of course, everyone's tired of it, right? I think it's sort of the opposite of that in niching, right? It's this fear or this trepidation that you're going to get into this little tiny niche. But like that little tiny niche, I mean, you were never talking to all 7 billion people. You were talking to a very small group anyway, whatever it was you were doing. But I think by niching down, and I think this is especially critical for small businesses, that you can go and I mean, if you've got limited marketing dollars and you've got limited hours in the day because you're a one-man operation or, one wearing many hats in a small firm, for example, this ability to really focus in on who your guy is almost down to the person. If you could really identify who George is and George has this set of characteristics, how much easier to market to George is it than to market to North America? For example, there's just too many intricacies to try and market to a really broad audience, where if you actually know who you're marketing to, it becomes much easier and much more easily done with limited budgets and limited bandwidth. So I think there's some value to that.
Yeah. And, the interesting thing, I've gone through this exercise. It's the first thing we do with every new client. We go through something we call the ideal client focus. And we kind of take them through a thinking process to help them get clear on the characteristics of what they would describe as an ideal client. And that might include, focusing on a vertical part of the market, or it could be, focusing in other ways. But at the end of that, having done this with dozens and dozens of businesses, I have yet to find anybody define their ideal client so narrow that it wasn't a market that was still far bigger than they could ever serve.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great observation. I mean, it's so true because we get caught up in it. And again, I think it is all sort of related to this idea that, we're speaking to everyone when we go out to Instagram or whatever, everyone must know what we're talking about. But the reality is, even if you niche down, like probably the most niched thing you could possibly imagine, I don't know what it is, I'm not even going to venture a guess because it'd probably get pretty dark. But but the idea is that, even in that tiniest of niches, there's still millions of people, well, maybe not millions, but, definitely an audience that's as big or bigger than you could possibly serve.
Well, let me give you an example, because this sort of takes it to the extreme. So I live in Tallahassee, Florida. We're like the 11th largest metropolitan area in Florida. Calling us a metropolitan area is probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but we're the state capital. We've got 3 universities here, or 2 universities and a community college. And so I've got a client here that is in financial services. So he sells life insurance and annuities and all that kind of stuff. And he has narrowed his focus down. He started with state employees because they're all participants in the state of Florida retirement system. And there's certain things that he can do with them based on his expertise. Well, then he realized that within that group, university professors were actually pretty good clients of his because they always tended to save money and be fairly conservative financially. And then he realized that his very best clients were professors at Florida State University. So he has narrowed it down to that.
Oh, wow.
Okay, we got about, I don't know, between 150 and 200,000 people who live here. He's probably narrowed it down to, I don't know, maybe 5,000. And it's still more than he'll ever do business with in his career.
Right.
That
Yeah,
makes
no,
sense.
it's crazy. But, and you don't think about it that way, but yeah.
Well, and just one key point. So you might be thinking, oh, well, he must not be doing that much business. For the last 2 years, he's been the number one annuity salesperson in one of the largest annuity companies. It's a big national name you would know in the United States.
Well, I think that's the thing, right? Niching allows you the opportunity to become truly expert at something versus trying to be this generalist that knows, a lot about everything. You actually can, again, back to saving bandwidth and saving time and money, by niching down into something, you can become the best at that. And so in the situation of this friend of yours, he knows, expressly how to serve the needs of a Florida State University professor, versus having to do all professors or state employees or whatever as he was prior. And so I think that's a great observation.
Yeah.
Well, and the interesting thing there, they aren't the only people he'll do business with, but his marketing is focused on them.
Mm-hmm.
And he serves them so well, and he's really the guy to go to in that market, but they know people. So they come in, they become clients, they love him. He creates these great outcomes for them. Well, the people that they know in the community that also work for the state and are part of this retirement program that all these state employees are in, they're an easy referral. The business owners that they know are an easy referral, because he's got this great relationship. But for his marketing, the thing that really drives the business, that's really, really focused. And I think that's the key for everybody listening to this to understand. We're not saying that you're all of a sudden going to cut off everybody that, that doesn't fit this mold. You'll probably still do business with them. But if you can get your marketing focused so that you've got one or two or maybe three of these very specific groups that you're communicating with, you're all of a sudden going to multiply your results with those groups just by focusing.
That makes 100% sense. So now we've got our niche, our market that we're going after. What do you think is the best or most effective marketing channel? Referrals, podcasting, online ads? What do you think is the best way to go?
Well, again, depends on what we're talking about trying to accomplish with it. So if we're talking about lead generation, then we always encourage our clients to start with referrals. And we start there mostly because with referrals, you get so much latitude. Your messaging can be off a little bit. Your offer can be off a little bit. But because that person is coming to you by personal recommendation, that kind of overcomes a lot of the deficiencies in your marketing. It allows you to really dial in that message. And one of the things that we've discovered with the businesses that we work with is when we start working with them, they often have a pretty fuzzy message. It hasn't really gotten honed. The offer that they're making is the same offer that everybody in their industry is making. There's nothing unique about it. And so we have to take a little bit of time to tune that in. The other thing that I think is important, and the reason that we push referrals at the beginning is because it's not that hard to scale that up to the amount of volume that most businesses need. The vast majority of businesses in the country are small enough and selling, most of them are selling services, and most of those services are a high enough ticket that they're looking for the right dozen or at least few dozen clients a year. They're not looking for 100 or 1,000 or 10,000. Okay. But the marketing stuff that we hear about in the media, the things you see on Facebook, the things you see that all the big high paid experts telling you to do are things that are designed to go get that volume. But you don't need that. You need the right small number, and referrals work better than anything to get that. And so we've got an approach that we use, to go and attract those referrals that I wrote about in my first book, Unstoppable Referrals. And so that's where we would start. But for some businesses, they get that in and they get their messaging dialed in, and then they kind of graduate and move up from there. Our approach is to kind of build the system at the bottom and build it around referrals so that you've got all the tools that you can kind of scale up with. And so the kind of the key tool, the thing we found that works best for service-based businesses, particularly if you're the expert in what you do, or you want to be positioned as the expert in what you do, is to use a book. And it's a great way to kind of capture your information and package it so that it can be shared without you being there. So you get leverage out of it. But it also can be shared in a much less risky way for somebody who might refer you, or on the recipient's end, on the prospect's end. There's no risk in them getting the book. They're not going to be resistant to it. Whereas they might be a little bit resistant to you, showing up and saying, "Hey, what can I sell you today?" And so it's kind of a benign way to get in front of people. But what I like about it is not only can we use it there in the referral, in kind of the referral model. When you graduate from that and you say, okay, well, I want to go to Facebook ads and do lead generation, or I want to go to Google ads and do lead generation, or I want to go to print. Now it's really easy to use that book as bait. And if it's got the right title, it's very easy to get people to raise a hand for it. And you know exactly why they're raising a hand. We all, when we buy a book or we ask for a book, if it's free, we do it because we judge that book by its cover.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. So can we, I guess, let's kind of keep going down this route of referrals, and maybe talk about, you've got 7 foolproof tactics for successful referral marketing. I think for some people, I mean, the basic version of a referral is this idea that, so-and-so has recommended me to you, but I don't think that covers like all definitions of referral marketing. Do you mind explaining what that is a little bit more? And then let's get into maybe some of these tactics people can employ.
Yeah. So, I mean, we all kind of know that the organic referrals, that come to us, they're good. They tend to close at a much higher percentage. Nielsen studied this, the company that does all the media studies. They've studied this, and referred prospects in their studies close 400% at a 400% higher rate. In other words, they're 4 times more likely to close than a prospect that comes from any form of cold advertising. And so we all know this kind of anecdotally. You go to a business meeting and people they'll tell you, "Oh yeah, I get most of my business by referral," and they say those are great prospects usually. And that all that stuff's great, but we want to be a little bit more proactive about it, because that's where most businesses get the majority of their business. If you look at the studies that are out, and there have been a number of different studies done, they all point to somewhere between 60 and 70% of all new business that's done in the U.S. being generated by referral or recommendation. So, we spend all this time worried about, should I be running Facebook ads or posting on LinkedIn or, advertising in the newspaper or doing webinars or all this other stuff. And that's only driving like 30 to maybe 40% of your new business. And we typically have no plan for referrals. And so the first thing is to make the decision that you're going to put focus on it. And then the second thing to begin thinking about is, well, how can I make this really easy? What we do most of the time with referrals is we go to our clients and we go, so Ryan, so Mike, do you guys know anybody that, wants to start a podcast today? And you're going to go, no. Or if you even think of somebody, you're probably going to think of a client. And then you got to do the math. All right. I just met Steve and I got this client, and the client's been with me for 10 years and they're worth like $500,000 to me at this point. Is it worth me risking this $500,000, relationship that I have with the client? Is it worth it to me to go refer them to Steve? Because if I do, there's zero upside for me, and I might be risking this really valuable relationship. And we put our clients in this mode, and they've got to make those difficult decisions. And even if they decide, yes, that I can help you, we now turn them into this unpaid and untrained sales force. They don't know how to identify a prospect. They don't know how to go and talk about what we do other than their experience of it. They probably don't know all of the different things that we do, and they don't know the real value that we deliver to our clients. And so we really kind of do ourselves a disservice by allowing them to speak for us in that way. What we want them to do is help us identify people who might be a fit. And then we want to give them a really easy way to share us and a way that's going to create that kind of crucial conversation. And so the crucial conversation that happens around referrals, might sound something like this. If you become aware, let's say, of my book on podcasting, maybe somebody gives you my book, you come back to that person, you go, oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I've been thinking about having a podcast. Or you might come back to that person and say, oh, hey, thanks a lot. What's the book all about? Well, now you've just empowered the person that gave you that book to tell you their story. Oh, yeah, this is the guy I work with. He produces my podcast. It's amazing. They do such great work for me. Whatever they're going to tell you. You've now orchestrated that conversation, but you've done it in a way that where that person that's making the referral doesn't feel like they've got to go and kind of put pressure on the other person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you've brought up podcasting. It's something we both do. Actually, I think you're at 160 and we're at 148. So we've kind of on the same trajectory here. Yeah. So I actually just want to ask you how the podcasting has gone for you and how it's, another marketing source and how it is a lead generation. Over the course of your podcast, what has changed in your business and how has it helped?
So the podcast has really transformed our business. We started in 2017, and not very long after that, we started offering to our clients, to produce podcasts for them. We actually got asked by our clients to do it. They saw what we were doing and the success we were having with it. But I think the really critical thing for people to understand is that podcasting by itself is not a really good lead generation tool. And that people get that confused a lot. They think I'm going to start a podcast and all of a sudden I'm going to have 1 million people listening and I'm going to get sponsors and then people, my phone's going to ring off the hook. Is that how it's been working for you guys?
No,
no.
So where a podcast fits is when, we talked before about that stack of business cards, that we all ignore. Podcast is the perfect tool to take the leads that don't close right now, but are going to close at some point in the future. You just don't know when. And it's the perfect tool to create all of the content that you need to show up and be interesting in the lives of all of those people for the long haul and convert them. I don't know if you guys have had this experience. I've had people on sales calls tell me that they were referred to our podcast by a colleague and they started listening to it. I had one guy actually tell me he was going on a business trip, so he downloaded a bunch of our podcasts. He binge listened 4 hours one way to the business trip, 4 hours the other, or to the meeting, 4 hours the other way back. I spent 8 hours with this guy in the car. I wasn't there, but he was listening to me. And next thing I know, he's booked an appointment on my calendar and he already knows I'm the guy.
Mm-hmm. So no, I mean, I don't think we have that exact experience, but I will say for sure that, we've been able to leverage the podcast. I mean, both Mike and I have our own businesses and our own things that we do outside of the show. And, we've been really blessed with the people who are willing to share their knowledge and expertise on our show that by by association, we get to hand off to our listening base. And, I think there's some value in these associations, getting to meet business leaders and top level people in their fields has been, for me anyway, very valuable as a way to, to network, to get to develop a personal relationship with somebody you might not otherwise get to know, just develop a little bit more of a, an understanding of the work they do and how you guys might, leverage that relationship and that sort of thing. And so I think there's a lot of, for us, at least this is the story I have to tell my wife all the time, is there are a lot of intangibles in podcasting, right? And I think that back to your earlier point, I think that there are so many people who think, I'm going to put my voice out there and I'll have all these listeners. And I think that goes back to this idea that everyone's seen my logo and that I'm trying to do business with everyone on the planet. And, it's all sort of the same idea that we don't understand scale and how things build over time. And, our show has been purposefully designed to be kind of low pressure. We don't have sponsors. We don't run ads necessarily. We don't do any of these kinds of things. And in large part, it is because, the intangibles or these relationships we're building, these shared experiences or overlaps in professional expertise and things have been so valuable that there's no need for the rest. I wouldn't consider myself anyway a professional podcaster, quote unquote. Not that we don't do a professional podcast and do it in a professional way, but I do all this other stuff. This is my opportunity to come meet really amazing people.
Well, I want to go back to something you mentioned. You mentioned the R word, relationship. And I've just found over the last couple of decades that all of the results that I've ever created in business have come from the relationships, the really quality relationships I've been able to build. And so, I said a moment ago that a podcast isn't by itself a great way to generate leads, but it is, I think, the most effective way to create business relationships, particularly with people that you would have a hard time connecting with in any other way. So if you're, selling to other businesses and you want to connect with those business owners, there is no easier way that I've ever found to get them to interact with you than to invite them to a podcast, because you're giving them a promotional opportunity. Most business owners will not even blink before they say yes to that. And so the way that we've used it, I'm really grateful for all of our listeners, and that's grown over time, but I'd still do it if nobody listened, because of the relationships that I get to build and then the opportunities that flow from that. And the way that, we started talking about systems at the beginning. I like to kind of make all of these systems work together. And so when we're working with a business, we're looking at a couple of kind of key tactics. Number one is we're going to create a book for them, because we can use that in a lot of different ways to generate leads. And it generates leads with a good context. We know why they've shown up in our world, because they've requested a book because of the title. And so if I've got that as an asset and I'm building all of these relationships with other business people who have networks of their own, and if I do that strategically and I'm building those relationships with people whose networks are full of the type of folks that I want to do business with, then it's real easy for me to, at the end of the interview, just have a quick conversation. I usually will ask somebody at the end of one of the interviews on our podcast, so this has been great. I learned a lot about, you and your business, but I'd love to know where you see yourself going in the future. What's the business look like a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? And I just be quiet and I listen. And I'm listening for their goals, because I want to understand what they're trying to build. And if I know what they're trying to build and where they're trying to go, then I can creatively come in and add value. And one of the ways that we do that is I'm able to come in and say, hey, I hear you're trying to, nurture this group of people that, is in your network. I'd love to help, and and in the process, maybe we can figure out a way where we can give them all a copy of my book. I'll pay for it, and what does that do? That gives them a way to be a hero to everybody that they know by giving them this gift. Hey, I found this really great book. I was on the guy's podcast, and here's this thing, this gift. So it makes them look great, but it gets me in front of all of those people. And, just to kind of illustrate how that can work, had a colleague on our podcast a couple of months ago. We got to talking afterwards. We agreed we both had a lot of overlap in our audiences and in our networks, and that his audience would benefit from our ideas and our audience would benefit from his ideas. And so we agreed to help each other. So he presented a webinar last week to our audience, and he was kind enough to share my new book, Podcast Prospecting, with his audience. Well, he shared it on a Friday, and I think he shared it again on Monday or Tuesday, a few days later. We generated almost 600 leads into our business who said, yes, I'm interested enough in that. I want that book.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great story. Sorry, Mike.
Oh, you're fine.
So I think one I guess nuance, but I think we're saying the same thing here, is that, so you gave the example of the guy who had basically listened to your podcast for 8 hours, 4 hours either direction, and that you basically, got to sit with him for 8 hours. And I think it's really important that, to look at a podcast as something other than a relationship with somebody is, almost doing it a disservice, because really just by the nature of putting out a podcast, you are developing a relationship, right? There's the one layer that's, the three of us sitting here having this conversation. But I don't know if this is the experience of either of your guys, but like for me, I listen to, a number of podcasts, both in my industry, but also just for fun. And I find that after I listen to a show for like a long enough period of time, I almost get this like vibe, like I know the guy, right? Like I remember one of them I listen to all the time is Adam Carolla's show. And I was listening to Adam, and then I had the opportunity to meet him at this podcasting event in California. And I felt like we were old friends, right? Like I'd known him for a long time. Like, oh yeah, no, I know all this stuff. I know everything about that guy. Now it's, sure, maybe it's a little bit one-sided relationship, but basically to your point, you're putting out this stuff. People begin to form this kind of relationship with you and your program. And then, that relationship, the logical next step is that you would have a conversation or that you would do whatever. And it wouldn't feel, abusive or any of that stuff because I know you. You've told me all about you. I know everything about you.
It's
and so
the weirdest
I think that's
thing
cool.
When someone reaches out to me and starts talking about an episode or a conversation I had with a guest, it's like, you weren't there. How did, and then it clicks like, oh, everyone's listening to this. And to me, sometimes it just feels like it's just a conversation between the three of us. But then when someone brings it up on the side, it's the weirdest feeling. Yeah.
And if you really think about it, there are a few more intimate things you can do than have a conversation directly piped into somebody's ear. If you were sitting across from them at coffee, maybe that's the equivalent. But that's a pretty intimate conversation that you're having with somebody, whether they're listening to you on the way to or from work or, in their earbuds while they go for a walk or whatever it is, but basically you're being piped right into their ears, So, you've instantly sort of pierced this veil where you've got a little bit of an advantage or a more, human relationship with this prospect or with this other person on the other end. And I think it's honestly one of the strongest things about podcasting as a medium, versus some of these other channels.
Yeah, I agree. I always like to visualize the listener. I don't like to think in terms of listeners, because that's not the way. So the person who's hearing us right now isn't experiencing it as if, there's 5,000 or 10,000 or I don't know how many people download your episodes, but they're not experiencing it as if it's a stadium full of people. They're experiencing it in a way they're by themselves. They're in their car or they're, at the gym on the treadmill. And you're right, we're in their ears. And I always like to kind of envision we're at a cocktail party. If you ever go to like a networking event, one of those evening chamber mixers and everybody's standing there with a drink trying to, have a conversation and figure out how they can exchange business cards. Well, if you ever had one of those conversations where there was that one person kind of off to the side and they weren't really saying anything, but they were sort of tangentially, listening to the conversation. That's how I like to kind of envision the listener right now is that they're here, they're hearing all of this. They're a part of the cocktail party with us. They're experiencing it just the way we are. And it is a really intimate thing. And that's how you can get to that conversation that I had with that potential client who had listened to me for 8 hours and he knew me. He trusted me at that point, but I'd never met him.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Well, so let's maybe circle back a little bit. I think it goes back to some of the ideas we were talking about early on with process, just as we're getting into the last few minutes here. One of the bullets on your one sheet that was particularly attractive to me is this idea of selling with authority, this idea of pre-selling clients so you don't have to sell. As I read that in my mind, that feels like that must be the establishment of these systems we were talking about. So I wondered if maybe you could get into that.
Yeah, it really is. So it starts on the very front end when we generate the lead. Okay. And back to our original kind of comments and the differentiation between chasing and attracting. And so when I generate a lead, I want them raising a hand for some information that really speaks to a situation that they're in that they want to change. Okay. And if I package that in something like a book, and you could package it in other ways. So you could package it as a webinar or a workshop or a seminar or a presentation. Those are all kind of authority packages as well. But the book is sort of the gold standard of authority packaging, I think. We tend to just place this really high value on a book. And so I like that form of packaging. It tends to work well. Well, you want to start there. If the first interaction that you have with a potential client isn't that you tackled them at the chamber meeting and stuffed your business card in their breast pocket, but it's that they requested your book and you were the guy or the gal that wrote the book. Well, that's a different way to start the relationship, isn't it? There's more authority there. Mm-hmm. Well, now they're coming into your world, and then they get an email from you about this podcast that you've just published, that week. And they go and listen to that, and they see, wow, Ryan's a celebrity. Mike's a celebrity. They interview all these business leaders. They must be a business leader too. Power of association, right? Mm-hmm. And if we get out of this mode of, I've got to close them the day that they show up, and use these systems to really work on them. It doesn't always take very long. I mean, you don't have to wait years. They can get in and within a short amount of time, they can have these different experiences with you. And now they're coming to you again, understanding their problem, because the book has gotten the right people to raise a hand that they have that problem. Okay. Hopefully, if they've read it, most don't, but if they've read it, you've educated them on the solutions and their options and all of that. And now they've bought into not only the fact that they got a problem, but that they need to solve it, that it's important enough to spend money on, and that you're the guy. Okay. And now they just need to know, can I trust you? And the podcast is better than any other medium, I think, at giving you a way to build that trust over time and in a way that scales. And so, all these systems fit together to do that pre-selling, so that by the time they show up in a sales conversation with you, all they want to know is what is the deal? What are the terms here? Because I already know I got a problem. I already know you have a solution. I already know I want your solution, and I already know I want you.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things that we always talk about, is this idea that people must know you, like you, trust you. And you can really deliver on all three of those points via podcast. And I think Mike has had this opportunity, this happened to him more often than I have. But I know one of the things that I guess one should be aware of too, when you start putting yourself out there, like via podcast or via book, however you do it, is being able to accept that when it comes to you. So, because I know that Mike sometimes has had people come to him and be like, oh, I heard so-and-so show, or, you had some guest on the other day and you were talking about this. And I know he's taken aback a little. I don't know, Mike, maybe talk about your experience with that.
Oh, Gina Grad and a few of the other shows that we've done, people have come up to me and expressed their like for the show. And it's just the weirdest experience when they do that, because to me, I'm just talking, I'm having fun. And then when I had a few people take selfies with me, and it just really freaked me out. I'm just not that guy. I don't like it, but it's happening. So whatever. Yeah.
But I think, so the point I'm trying to make basically is, yes, you've established this credibility. Yes, you've established this know you, like you, trust you. You've done all these things, but when they approach you, well, now you have to be prepared to catch them. Like, you have to, I guess, fully buy into your expertise, and that you're willing to now have those conversations. Because I think, sometimes, at least I'm the same way as Mike's described, like it would catch me a little off guard for someone to come to me and be like, oh, you're that guy that's, talk to so-and-so.
Yeah. It's just weird.
I got invited to speak at HubSpot's Inbound conference a few years ago. And I had a guy come up before I was about right as I was getting ready to, get prepared and going on stage. And he had a copy of my first book, Unstoppable Referrals, and he asked me to sign it. And that, talk about like catching you off guard. I'd signed books before, but they were always books I was sending to people. I'd never had anybody come up. And he had to put thought into that. He had to know I was speaking. He had to bring the book, on whatever trip he did. And, and then to come up, and he was just, it was the weirdest experience, but you're right. You have to be kind of prepared for that. It doesn't happen all the time. I mean, the current book that we just released is my fourth. It's not like I'm walking down the street signing books. Most people are, still don't know who I am. And I would think the same would be true of somebody like Seth Godin, right? So we're in marketing and business. We kind of know who Seth Godin is, but my wife has no clue.
Yeah. No, he'd be just another bald guy with cool glasses. Right.
So
no. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Before we close, one of your talking points on your one sheet is pricing, and why you should raise your prices. And to me, I have direct experience with this. I'm in the entertainment industry. I provide services for weddings and corporate events and all sorts of stuff. And I used to be lower on the totem pole with my pricing. And I noticed that when I over the years, as I increased my pricing, my clients seemed to get better versus a lot of the headaches I would have with the lower pricing. As I raised mine, my clients seemed to just accept the fact that I'm a professional and let me do my job versus kind of hovering and being a big pain in the butt. I just noticed that on your one sheet, and I wanted to bring it up because obviously you've probably had similar experiences with that.
Yeah, we work with a lot of businesses, and that's we always look at their offer, and I always talk with the business owner about the things that they feel challenged by, and with a lot of business owners, there's this feeling that they're always being undercut, and that there's a lot of commoditization in their market, and and pricing, where you're priced, I think plays a big factor in that. So there's kind of three positions you can be at in pricing. You could be at the low end, which is difficult to operate in because there's not a lot of profit there. You can be kind of in the middle and be around the industry standard, which means you don't stand out one way or another, really. And then you could be at the high end. Well, I'm just a big advocate of being at the high end because with the profit that you're going to generate at the high end, you can create an amazing experience for your clients, which is going to tend to attract better clients. You're going to make more money with less effort, and you're going to be able to really do the work at the level that you think it should be done. I mean, we work with a lot of people who are absolutely expert at what they do, but they feel like, for them to really do the level of service that their clients really need, that they're always being squeezed by the fees that they're charging. And so part of what we do is we want to generate demand through all the systems that we've talked about so that there's always more demand than there is supply of you and your business. And when we accomplish that, now you can comfortably raise your prices. The reason most people don't raise their prices isn't because they don't want to. I've yet to meet a business owner that didn't want to raise his prices. The reason we don't raise them is because we're not sure where the next client is coming from. And so we feel like we've got to take the deal that's in front of us.
Yeah. One thing that I've noticed is by raising my prices, I don't have to take as many gigs or events. I can be a little bit more selective, and that one event that I'm doing would make up for 3 of my old events that I was charging the lower rates for. So essentially it's opening up my calendar. I'm keeping the same amount of income coming in, and I'm not pulling my hair out in the process. It's just been a really beneficial thing for me in my business to be able to do that. And I just thought it was interesting that you had that on your one sheet, and I wanted to bring it up. So I guess in closing, we're about at that time. Where can people find you and learn more about you?
Well, it's okay with you guys. I'd love to give everybody listening a copy of my latest book, which is called Podcast Prospecting, which just came out within the last week as we record this. And so if they go to unstoppableceo.net/eggs, they can download the book for free there. And that's the best place to reach me. That'll get you plugged into our podcast if you want to check that out. And there's a spot on there where you can reach out to me directly if you'd like to.
Perfect. Great. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Steve. This has been an awesome conversation. Really great insights, and I appreciate having you on.
Thanks, guys. It's been fun.
Thanks so much.